Chill Computer Guy. Today we're in Bitwig Studio 2.0. Look at the size of this GUI. We have the GUI all magnified so you can see what's going on the screen a little bit better. This saves me a lot of time because in post-production I don't have to zoom in on sections of the screen because that takes a lot of extra time. So hopefully you can see everything fairly clearly. I would never actually work in this size GUI because it doesn't give you a whole lot of screen real estate. But it does make everything on the screen a little bit larger so you can see it in the full context of the screen. Now today's video, tutorial, whatever you want to call it, there's been a couple videos that I've seen over the years on YouTube talking about this technique, and I believe it was started first. The first video I saw was in Ableton, and the video was called something to the effect of the last drum rack you'll ever need. And basically what it did is it took the Ableton drum rack, which has I don't know how many cells in it, but they basically drug a tons of samples, filled up the entire drum rack with samples, and then you could cycle through them and audition the different samples as you played your MIDI loop. Now you can do the same type of thing in Bitwig, but Bitwig gives you a lot more options to really kind of fine-tune it and to make it run much more efficiently. Put in a drum rack here. Okay, so let's throw in a drum machine. Okay, and then we're going to go to our samples, and we're going to go to Bitwig drum machines kicks. These are just the Bitwig drum machines that come with Bitwig. So what you do is you select the first one, you go down to the bottom, you hold down shift, select the last one, then you drag these over here to the C1, and then you drop them, okay? And then what it does is it fills the entire, I mean look at that, there's just tons and tons of kick drum samples in this machine here. Now what you can do is at the beginning of this, you put a note pitch shifter, okay, at the very beginning. Okay, and then what you want to do is right click and you go map to controller or key, find a controller or key on your keyboard, there it is. And you see now I'm turning the knob and you can see the semitones going up and down. So now if I play my kick drum, my 4/4 kick drum, as I turn the knob, we're auditioning different kick drum sounds. Bump your octave up a couple times, and then that'll put you up into your higher notes there. See, now we're clear up in here. So I guess you can go up all the way. But so basically this is a technique that you can play your beat and then slowly turn your MIDI controller and audition these. And really get just the right sound. Now the problem with this is if you go to your mix, you know how you can fold your drum racks down into individual channels, and you open this up, you're gonna have I mean it's just like a shitload of channels here. You got like 1,000 million channels. Like look at all these, and that to me is an absolute nightmare. So the original technique of just slamming them into the drum rack, I don't really like that technique specifically because I don't want to deal with 1,500 mix channels. Now, the variation on that is, let me go ahead and deactivate this track here. The variation on that of using the multi-sampler. In other words, putting all your drum samples into the multi-sampler, okay? And then what you can do is then put a remote on here, and then go into your note effects. Same thing. As I turn this, I'm flipping through my samples. You can see I'm auditioning my kick drums. Okay, so as I turn my knob, now with this technique, it remedies the problem with having tons of mix channels, because you can see if I open this up now, I only have my 4 mix channels. But what's going on with this technique is within each cell is not just a sampler, there's a multi-sampler. So the kick drum in this example, if I open up my multi-sampler, you can see what I did is I highlighted my kick drums and then drug them over to the multi-sampler. And you can do that just by dragging them over there. I'm not going to do it because I already got my kick drums in there. So by turning that, you're actually cycling through the kick drums. and you're doing it all within the same mix channel. Let me play a beat and I'll kind of show you how this technique works. I don't know why it says open hat. Ooh, that's nice. And so you can see quickly, you can just click through these, audition your kick drums, and I recommend hooking these up to a MIDI controller. That way you can turn the knob and very slowly and cycle through. So yeah, you can do it that way, and that gives you quite a bit more control, and then that way you only have your 4 mix channels. If you go here to your note effects and you add a multi-note right here, you can start layering. So let's say I play my MIDI loop here. So you can see what I've done is not only am I controlling my my kick drum sample through the semitones, but I'm also layering through using the multi-note. And so you can actually adjust your velocity as well, but this technique actually works best if let's say the third layer here. I recommend turning the gain down on the actual sample here. The velocity does affect the volume, but not as significantly as the actual gain control on the sample. And so using this technique with the multi-note and these controls you have here, as well as, you know, the gain, the semitone, you can put some of these in reverse. You can really get some really good layering ideas off just using the technique of the multi-sample with the multi-note. Use your note pitch shifter to audition. And then if you turn this now, you're going to offset your layering. Now, because this is part of this, you can actually also control these here. Okay? And then rename these, you know, rename layer 1. You know, you can do that, and then you can also, you know, control the on-off of your layers, enable your layers. Just like that. And then once you do that, you can just close all this stuff down. Let's solo the kick drum here. Hit play. Now you can also I mean, really, the sky's the limit. You can go completely nuts with this, but the ability to just kind of have to layer and then audition your layers and then kind of like shift your layers around. Just put a bunch of kick drum sounds, put a bunch of whatevers in here. This actually works really great for hi-hats. I actually use this technique with hi-hats. I put a bunch of open and closed hats in here, and then I can layer them together. And then you can also use an offset to get the hats to offset, and you can get some interesting rhythms. So that's technique 2. Now another technique, which I consider the most refined of the sample drum rack techniques, is one that I was working on earlier today. I put it together and I figured I would make a tutorial for it. And let's go ahead and activate this. What I've done here is it's the same type of thing where you have, you know, just your 4 mix channels. So you don't have a million mix channels, you just have your 4 mix channels. It's a variation on the last one, but by doing it this way, what you can do is have everything be closed down to those 3. So let's play this loop here. So you can see we're auditioning the entire drum rack through just 3 macros. Now how we're doing this is it's a similar technique. Each one of these drum cells has a note pitch shifter, but what I've done is I have mapped the semitones to a macro. Now the advantage of doing this is with the remote, let's say if we add a remote page here, I'm just going to show as an example, let's say this glide for example. If I click here and I want to control the glide, this is an exact mirror of this button. In other words, there's no way that the throw on this button can be less than this. Let's say I want to go from 0 semitones to 49 semitones. But I want that to represent the entire throw of this knob. There's no way I can do that. And so if you look at our multi-samplers, the multi-sample, let's go to the hi-hats for example, you can see that if I control that with a, now the problem with using the remote is you have no control over the throw of it. In other words, if I audition my hi-hat here, you see it -30 is the first hat, and then so I can go well below that, and then the last hat is going to be +3. So basically from +3 to -30 represents all my hi-hats, and so it's very hard to really, now if you hook this up to a controller, let's say here for example, it's very hard to audition your samples without just skipping big lumps of them. In other words, you really have to turn the key very softly, and so you don't have control over the throw of this. The remote is just basically a mirror of the button. You can't control how much of that button or how much of the throw of that particular potentiometer. You don't have control over that, but with the macros you do, and so that's why I use the macros here. In other words, let's go to the kick drums here. You can see if I put the macro all the way to the bottom, that's kick drum number 1. All the way to the top is kick drum number 33 or however many. Now if you click on this, you can see that I have control over the end of the throw. Okay, so how to set this up is you zero all this out. Go octave 0, make sure this is 0, the fine is double click to 0. Now on your macro, make sure that's also at 0. So let's go ahead and play this. Now you can see that's going to give us our second sample. Why that gives us our second sample, I have no idea, because we've started on C1 here. So I have no idea. C1 should be the 0, but I don't know why. Okay, so we need to go -2 semitones. So go -2, hit enter, and that should give us our very first sample, and it does. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to click the arrow, and then we want to drag this up while it's playing to, let's see, we said 33, right? So let's drag that up to 33, right? There it is. Click the arrow again, and that should give us our first sample all the way to our last sample, okay? So you can see 100% gives us our last sample, 0% gives us our first sample. So basically the throw of this potentiometer is going to cover every single hi-hat. But you can turn this in a way that you're not going to be skipping around, because the throw is much less than it would be as opposed to the remote, which is going to automatically give you your, -48 to +48 is what the remote's going to give you. This, on the other hand, gives you, 30, 35 semitones or whatever it is. So you can see that that is much easier to handle than a remote, which gives you from -48 to +48. That's going to give you 96 positions. This right here gives you like 35 positions. So you can see it's a lot easier to handle. So as you can see, we set up our hi-hats. To do that, we basically found where our first hat was at, we found where our last hat was at, and then set the macro to those extremes. Now, if you want to manually control this, you can actually click right here and then set your amount right here, which is 33. Now to set that, make sure this is on 0, this is on 0, and then again, we've counted 39 samples there. So if we hit this arrow, and then we move this up to 39, see, you can see our semitones there. And if you hold down on shift, it'll go much slower for you. Okay, so when you get close, just hold down on that shift key, and you can really get real precise with that. Let's go to 39. Okay, so there we go. Hit the arrow again, and now this rheostat or macro or potentiometer goes from 0 semitones all the way to 39. Okay, so if we play this, this should cover all of our samples. There's our first sample, and there's our last sample. So 100% is our last sample, 0% is our first sample, and then as we turn that, we can easily audition each sample without skipping them, because the throw of this potentiometer covers 39, not the 96, which is -48 +48. And then of course, if you set this to your map to your controller key there it goes. And now when you play your sample there, you can just turn your controller key to audition. Okay. Next up, we're going to do our snares. Now to do our snares, we're going to go ahead and just sample the snares there. Again, make sure the snare is selected, open up our multi-sample, right click, make sure there's nothing going on there. So we want to set this to 0. We want to set everything to 0, and then we're going to hit play. And you can see we're on the second one. Again, this should be the first, since we started on C1, this should be 0 semitones. I don't know why it's doing that. It's some sort of a bug, I guess, in Bitwig Studio. So we're gonna start with -1 semitone. That should give us our first one. And then again, we're gonna count. We got 12, we got 24, we got 36. It looks like 37. Hit your arrow and go up to 37. There you go. Again, hit down on shift to slow down. Hit on shift to slow down. God damn it. There you go, 37. Now hit the arrow again. Now, if you play this, There's our first sample. Oh, we want to go to, so we got one too many. Now to fix this, you just got to go up here and type in 36. There you go. Now that should give us our first sample and our last sample and everything in between. So you can see -1 to +36, that's 37 samples that are in there. So instead of the -48 +48, that's 96. The remote's going to give you a throw of 96. This macro potentiometer or rheostat is going to give you a throw of 37. So that's a lot more control. So now that this is all set up, we can go ahead and unsolo this, play our beat. You know, we can close this stuff down. We don't even need to see this stuff, you know. And there you go. Very easy, tons of control, only using 3 macros. Now you can add, of course, more macros, one maybe for the open hat, one for the claps, one for the shaker, one for anything you want to put in the drum rack. I recommend putting it into a multi-sampler, finding the first sample and the last sample, and then setting your macro so the throw includes all the samples, but not so much that you're skipping around on them. I recommend about anywhere from about 3 octaves worth of samples, 36 to 48 samples. That way when you do turn your controller, you know, set these up with controller keys, you're not skipping your samples because there's so many of them in there. Anyway, that's how to set up the drum rack using macros as opposed to remotes to have more control over your samples. All right, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Chill Computer Guy. We'll see you guys next week.